Letter 16 of the Backwoods of Canada, by Catharine Parr Traill. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Backwoods of Canada, by Catharine Parr Traill. Letter 16. Indian Hunters. Having in a former letter given you some account of a winter visit to the Indians, I shall now give a short sketch of their summer encampment, which I went to see one beautiful afternoon in June, accompanied by my husband and some friends that had come in to spend the day with us. The Indians were encamped on a little peninsula jutting out between two small lakes. Our nearest path would have been through the bush, but the ground was so encumbered by fallen trees that we agreed to go in the canoe. The day was warm, without being oppressively hot, as it too often is during the summer months, and for a wonder the mosquitoes and black flies were so civil as not to molest us. Our light bark skimmed gaily over the calm waters beneath the overhanging shade of cedars, hemlock, and balsams, that emitted a delicious fragrance as the passing breeze swept through the boughs. I was in raptures with a bed of blue irises mixed with snow white water lilies that our canoe passed over. Turning the stony bank that formed the point, we saw the thin blue smoke of the camp curling above the trees, and soon our canoe was safely moored alongside those belonging to the Indians, and by help of the straggling branches and underwood I contrived to scramble up a steep path, and soon found myself in front of the tent. It was a Sunday afternoon. All the men were at home. Some of the younger branches of the families, for there were three that inhabited the wigwam, were amusing themselves with throwing the tomahawk at a notch cut in the bark of a distant tree, or shooting at a mark with their bows and arrows, while the elders reposed on their blankets within the shade, some reading, others smoking, and gravely eyeing the young rival marksmen at their feats of skill. Only one of the squaws was at home. This was my old acquaintance, the hunter's wife, who was sitting on a blanket with her youngest, little David, a papoose of 3 years, who was not yet weaned, and reposing between her feet. She often eyed him with looks of great affection, and patted his shaggy head from time to time. Peter, who is a sort of great man, though not a chief, sat beside his spouse, dressed in a handsome blue surtout coat, with a red worsted sash about his waist. He was smoking a short pipe, and viewing the assembled party at the door of the tent with an expression of quiet interest. Sometimes he lifted his pipe for an instant to give a sort of inward exclamation at the success or failure of his son's attempt to hit the mark on the tree. The old squaw, as soon as she saw me, motioned me forward, and, pointing to a vacant portion of her blanket, with a good natured smile, signed for me to sit beside her, which I did, and amused myself with taking note of the interior of the wigwam and its inhabitants. The building was of an oblong form, open at both ends, but at nights I was told the openings were closed by blankets. The upper part of the roof was also open. The sides were rudely fenced with large sheets of birch bark, drawn in and out between the sticks that made the framework of the tent. A long, slender pole of ironwood formed a low beam, from which depended sundry iron and brass pots and kettles, also some joints of freshly killed venison and dried fish. The fires occupied the centre of the hut, around the embers of which reposed several meek deer hounds. They envisioned something of the quiet apathy of their masters, merely opening their eyes to look upon the intruders, and seeing all was well, returned to their former slumbers, perfectly unconcerned by our entrance. The hunter's family occupied one entire side of the building, while Joseph Muskrat with his family, and Joseph Bolens and his squaw shared the opposite side, their several apartments being distinguished by their blankets, fishing spears, rifles, tomahawks, and other property. As to the cooking utensils, they seemed from their scarcity to be held in common among them. Perfect amity appeared among the three families, and if one might judge from outward appearance, they seemed happy and contented. On examining the books that were in the hands of the young men, they proved to be hymns and tracts, one side printed in English, the other the Indian translation. In compliance with our wishes, the men sang one of the hymns, which sounded very well, but we missed the sweet voices of the Indian girls, whom I had left in front of the house, sitting on a pine log and amusing themselves with my baby, and seeming highly delighted with him and his nurse. Outside the tent the squaw showed me a birch bark canoe that was building. The shape of the canoe is marked out by sticks stuck in the ground at regular distances, the sheet of bark being wetted and secured in their proper places by cedar laths, which are bent so as to serve the purpose of ribs or timbers. The sheets of bark are stitched together with the tough roots of the tamarack, and the edges of the canoe also sewed or laced over with the same material. The whole is then varnished over with a thick gum. I had the honour of being paddled home by Mrs. Peter in a new canoe, just launched, and really the motion was delightful. Seated at the bottom of the little bark, on a few light hemlock boughs, I enjoyed my voyage home exceedingly. The canoe, propelled by the Amazonian arm of the swarthy matron, flew swiftly over the waters, and I was soon landed in a little cove within a short distance from my own door. In return for the squaw's civility, I delighted her by a present of a few beads for working moccasins and knife sheaths, with which she seemed very well pleased, carefully securing her treasure by tying them in a corner of her blanket with a bit of thread. With a peculiar reserve and gravity of temper, there is at the same time a degree of childishness about the Indians in some things. I gave the hunter and his son one day some coloured prints, which they seemed mightily taken with, laughing immoderately at some of the fashionably dressed figures. When they left the house they seated themselves on a fallen tree, and called their hounds round them, displaying to each severally the pictures. The poor animals, instead of taking a survey of the gaily dressed ladies and gentlemen, held up their meek heads and licked their masters' hands and faces; but old Peter was resolved the dogs should share the amusement of looking at the pictures, and turned their faces to them, holding them fast by their long ears when they endeavoured to escape. I could hardly have supposed the grave Indian capable of such childish behaviour. These Indians appear less addicted to gay and tinselly adornments than formerly, and rather affect a European style in their dress. It is no unusual sight to see an Indian habited in a fine cloth coat and trousers, though I must say the blanket coats provided for them by government, and which form part of their annual presents, are far more suitable and becoming. The squaws, too, prefer cotton or stuff gowns, aprons and handkerchiefs, and useful articles, to any sort of finery, though they like well enough to look at and admire them. They delight nevertheless in decking out the little ones, embroidering their cradle wrappings with silks and beads, and tacking the wings of birds to their shoulders. I was a little amused by the appearance of one of these Indian cupids, adorned with the wings of the American war bird, a very beautiful creature, something like our British bullfinch, only far more lively in plumage, the breast and under feathers of the wings being a tint of the most brilliant carmine, shaded with black and white. This bird has been called the war bird, from its having first made its appearance in this province during the late American war, a fact that I believe is well authenticated, or at any rate has obtained general credence. I could hardly help smiling at your notion that we in the Backwoods can have easy access to a circulation library. In one sense, indeed, you are not so far from the truth, for every settler's library may be called a circulating one, as their books are sure to pass from friend to friend in due rotation; and, fortunately for us, we happen to have several excellently furnished ones in our neighbourhood, which are always open to us. There is a public library at York, and a small circulating library at Cobourg, but they might just as well be on the other side of the Atlantic for any access we can have to them. I know how it is. At home you have the same idea of the facility of travelling in this country as I once had. Now I know what bush roads are, a few miles' journey seems an awful undertaking. Do you remember my account of a day's travelling through the woods? I am sorry to say they are but little amended since that letter was written. I have